Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 14. Chapter 14, My Weapon Can Change into a Girl. FML. Joshua approached the great sword that was nearest to where he stood. It was a sword so huge that it could be considered extraordinary. However, it was not very detailed, indicating shoddy workmanship. Half of the sword's body was embedded in the middle of the stone-made floor. Even though the sword was only partially visible, it was already half the height of an average human. Although the body of the sword was a little rusty, one could tell that the core of the sword was still strong and durable. The gray surface of the sword was absorbing the light in its surroundings, making it look as if it was shrouded in darkness. When he stood right before the sword, the tattoo on the back of his palm blazed brightly. Joshua fixed his eyes on the sword and stayed silent as if he was in deep thought. One moment later, he reached his hand out, gripping the hilt of the sword. Whistle. A gust of wind suddenly rose from within the underground room. Because of that, the smell of rust that overwhelmed the entire room was removed along with the wind. Meanwhile, the other weapons that were rooted in the ground all around the room began to quiver. No matter whether swords, spears, or axes, they resonated faintly, as if they were celebrating. Yet, these weapons emitted a feeling of sorrow as well. With the resonance of the countless weapons around him, Joshua glared at the sword as he attempted to pull it out of the ground, bit by bit. Light that was formed from magic began to flow out from the void. With the creaking sounds of metal against stone, one could tell that the blade of the sword was gradually leaving the ground, exposing more of itself to Joshua. Even though the sword was covered in dust and dirt, it was not dull at all. Its sharp edges could still reflect the light as bright as the stars. Looking at the light that continued to shine in all directions, Joshua had already pulled out half the sword. Now, he only needed to pull out the tip of the sword out from the ground. However, the sword appeared to be stubborn, as though it was refusing to leave the ground because something was missing. "Why are you rejecting me?" Joshua questioned the sword softly. "Brand the mark." Suddenly, a stream of words appeared right before his eyes. Joshua was a little surprised at first. However, an instant later, he reacted to the system notification and said, "Indeed. I see it now." Taking a deep breath, Joshua kept all other thoughts aside, emptying his mind and soul. As he began to breathe steadily, his internal organs, bones, muscles and other parts of his body began to quiver. It went along his blood vessels and tendons, all the way to his right hand that was holding the hilt on the sword. The burning light, also known as combat aura, began to condense along with the origin force of searing steel. Both forces swirled and gathered together at one point on his right hand before the forces were injected into this worn-out great sword, purifying its interior. The rust was beginning to fade and the dents and cracks on the sword slowly vanished one after another. Following the glittering radiance that overwhelmed Joshua's sight, Joshua's mark had been branded on the sword. Meanwhile, the last part of the sword, the tip, had left the ground. It was completely pulled out of the ground, leaving some dust flying about around the hole where the sword was plunged in long before. A powerful blast of magical energy came out of the sword. Light orbs that looked like fireflies slowly emerged all around the surroundings in the room. These light orbs then fell onto the blade of the sword like snowflakes. With relative ease, Joshua contained the sword as he focused his sight on the blade. Right after that, a blinding light shone across every corner of the room. The hilt of the giant sword that he held in his right hand slowly turned into a soft hand. The hand then rested slowly and lightly on his palm. There was a black mark right on the wrist of the silky soft hand. Well, the mark looked similar to the mark he has on his wrist, of a snake entwined around a huge sword. "Nice to meet you, master." The elegant voice that only a lady could have was heard. Joshua raised his head slowly to see a petite figure in a blazer dress standing right in front of him. This girl had a long silvery hair that flowed with the wind. Meanwhile, her two greenish pupils that glowed like fireflies were radiating with a strange vibe. She smiled at Joshua and bowed to him like a butler. Then she gently pulled out her right hand and bowed at him again. I shall obey the heir of the Radcliffes to fulfill the promise made in ancient times. You must be my master. I'm Akrol's swordbreaker. You can call me Ying. Joshua had a solemn expression on his face. Without saying a word, his gaze was fixed on this girl who had the vibe of an old butler. It wasn't because he was too shocked or whatsoever. Truth to be told, his thoughts were scrambled so badly that he could not even react to anything anymore. Not long after, realization dawned upon him. Divine armaments are not humans that turn into weapons but the other way round. I got it all wrong in the first place. Naturally, he did not voice those thoughts aloud. Meanwhile, this silver-haired girl called Ying was still chattering delightedly. She was laughing with a slightly aristocratic demeanor. Then she said, I've answered your call by leading you here. Your will shall be my hope as well. Now, our pact shall be fulfilled. Henceforth, I shall battle by your side. I shall open the way with my conviction and complete all challenges with my strength. No matter how dazed he was, Joshua reacted naturally to the situation as he was now on the most important step of forming the pact. The power of the bloodline was gushing through every single vein in his body. With a serious expression, he placed his hand on Ying's forehead. If that's the case, the pact has been formed. With the influence of some mysterious force, their voices sounded ethereal. Both of them chanted solemnly in unison, by obeying the ancient covenant, my life is in your hands. My honor lies in the blade that I am. With the blood pact that binds this oath of mine, I shall never turn my back on you. At that moment, a soft glow appeared from nowhere. Joshua could feel a warm sensation being released from within his body, especially his right wrist. That was the special thing about a bloodline pact. Although Joshua had not gone into a pact with any other divine armaments, he was unconsciously familiar with the entire process. He noticed that his body also has an inexplicable sense of ability to adapt. If he could have children in the future, then his children should inherit this sense of his towards the divine armaments. Upon completing forming the pact, the two of them let out a sigh of relief. Ying's sigh was even louder. She seemed very content at the moment, with no intention whatever to hide the evident joy on her face. However, Joshua knew that she was just her outer appearance. Ying might appear to be a 14 or 15-year-old girl. However, as a condensed form of energy in a humanoid form, she was a divine armament after all. Her combat effectiveness in her humanoid state is definitely not weak at all. At the very least, she was much stronger than a large number of silver-tier humans. Meanwhile, the attributes of the girl were naturally available to Joshua by now. Name, Ying Akrol. Race, Divine Armament. Race skills, Divine Armament transformation, resonates with the master who formed a pact with her and transforms into a weapon. Level, 23, Silver Tier, Challenge Level 16, Silver Tier. Attributes. Physique, small humanoid form with a long lifespan from another world/sword length, 197 centimeters. HP, lively. Vitality, lively. Transformational weapon, Akrol's swordbreaker. Status, none. Class, the 7th generation of divine armament for slaying Aragamas/servant. Innate abilities, spiritual form body, sleepless, food not required, pro-physical. Skills, weakness break, oppressive impairment, focused destruction, sharpness enhancement, decapitate, dreadful gleam, mutilation. Equipment, women's double-breasted blazer dress. Divine armament transformation level 1, last for 1 hour. Cooldown 24 hours. Transforms into weapon state, providing the master with half of Ying's own health and 1/5 of her attributes. Compliant to the pact to get a new unparalleled weapon for observing the world. Attributes, innate abilities, and skills. The power level is not weak at all. Meanwhile, this girl's just like a newborn divine armament. She'll definitely become much stronger than now if she's nourished correctly. No wonder the old count saw her as an assistant. It wasn't just because she could transform into a weapon. Keeping the thoughts in his mind, Joshua knew that Ying was only a newborn. Even so, she already possessed the power level of a silver while in her humanoid form. She could still transform into her weapon form when facing imminent danger to increase the power level of her master. As expected of the ancient races that had started the Continental War. Her cute appearance could just be a guise that hides the fact that she existed along the races back them. She could potentially be just as crazy as the ancient races. Joshua knew better than anyone about his followers. They were handsome men and women all the way. So even if they couldn't get a powerful pet, they would still pick those that look pretty and nice. Some of them even attempted to do their research on the outside world and demonology just so that they could summon a leprechaun or a succubus. Well, that was for the mages only. As for the other people, finding a good pet was more convenient. A normal fighter would already be better off if they could get a mount. He could imagine how crazy the melee combatants would become when the powerful and adorable race called divine armaments was exposed to the public. Well, Joshua had no interest in this and he did not follow any of the related news as well. All he did was focus on slaying the bosses in dungeons. However, he would still hear many things about the divine armaments. Mostly because the ladies that went along into the dungeons with him would talk about it on the public chat. Well, that should be sufficient to prove how famous that thing turned out to be. If Joshua was still in his initial world, and those people in his party discovered this, they would definitely be envious and outraged that their leader who only knew how to hack and slash managed to form a pact with a divine armament. My name is Joshua Van Radcliffe. He reached out his right hand to the silver-haired girl right in front of him. Joshua lowered his head a little while looking into the eyes of the girl seriously. He said, I would love to continue our chatter a little more. However, time is running out. Now, I have to fight my enemies. Are you up for it? Meanwhile, Ying had also reached out her right hand. Her silky soft hand was too small to grab his palm fully. So she could only rest her hand on top of Joshua's palm. She looked Joshua in the eyes, smiled, and bowed again. It's my pleasure to fight alongside with you, Master. I'm born for this. Very well. Upon ending the conversation, Joshua nodded and turned around. Then, he headed towards the hall beneath the ground. Then let's depart now. Ying followed along without saying a word. The two of them headed out of the dark room. At the same time, the aftermath of Joshua infiltrating the city had only begun to show. Incompetent trash. Infuriated, Danlaya fiercely slammed the table in the main hall of his mansion where he usually welcomed his guests. 50 heavily equipped soldiers. How can you all fail to last for even a few minutes? Are you saying you were all defeated by merely a strike? Without having anything to refute, the messenger could only lower his head, observing the situation from the side. He also cursed quietly at soldiers' incompetence. At the same time, he was also praying that Danlaya would take it easy on him. Keeping silent, huh? So you call yourself one of the strongest mercenaries in the north? You're silver tier, yet you only know how to retreat. You can't even provide any information about your enemy. Not even his strength. So what good can you actually do then? The chubby man roared at him. He then panted heavily, with the veins on his head visibly popping. The messenger could only keep his head low and hope for the best that he would not become Danlaya's punching bag. Well, Danlaya did not intend to throw a tantrum at the person before him. Although he seemed furious at the moment, his mind was intact, already thinking about something else. Could it be true that Joshua is so powerful now? No, his talent has always been more superior than my brother's. It seems that after he survived the bloody battle with the orcs, he somehow managed to find a new way to enhance his strength in this time of crisis. Now, even the silencers are no match for him. That would mean I have no one left to stop him. You, summon the 3 samurai mercenaries that are hanging around the backyard. After coming to a decision, Danlaya commanded the messenger, while frowning. Tell them I'll even pay more than they requested. Just tell them to stay close to me. Protect me at all cost. Yes. Finally, the messenger was able to leave the dreadful hall. He quickly stood up and walked out of the hallway as fast as a rat trying to escape. Then he quickly headed towards the backyard. He did not dare to look back at Danlaya's cold eyes when he left. The Radcliffe family has only been a family of a single heir. Even if there are other descendants out there, most of them would be sent to the south of the empire, the origin of the country, to become merchants like myself. After the messenger left, Danlaya had no reason to keep his look of fury any longer. He frowned and started thinking. For generations, my family has been keeping gold to themselves. There must be something, some secrets I have yet to discover. Well, that can be resolved later. However, that Wilson family can't be trusted at all. Their intents have been devious since the beginning. I should place more attention on them rather than on Joshua. After saying all that, he revealed a cold sneer on his face while he rubbed a huge sapphire ring on his thumb. Treating me like a puppet, huh? That's adorable. Do not underestimate a merchant who can make a lot of money. Chapter 15. Chapter 15, The Beginning of a Prelude. Boring. Francis was standing right before the entrance of the Count's mansion with a long spear and a shield in each hand. He looked at the empty streets as he sighed. It's pretty obvious that there's no one here. Why was I ordered to guard the entrance? Tisk. The weather is goddamn cold. The leaves still had some frost on them. The ground was covered with snow. The wind of early winter was chilly. Francis could not help but shiver, as his armor was forged from steel, which was not able to keep Francis warm. On the other hand, the other parts of his armor that were made of leather was as thin as a paper did not prevent the cold air from rushing through them. Even so, Francis did not let his guard down at all. Instead, he was very serious about his job now. He was looking through every detail around him. Even though he was complaining, he knew it deep down in his bones that he must work after receiving money from others. Well, he had been a mercenary for over a decade. It was true that guarding an entrance was not exactly an amazing job that most people would be comfortable with. However, that job should be much better than battling against others. Francis was well aware of the incident at the city gates that happened a while ago, as he was informed not long after he woke up. According to the messenger, the intruder was powerful enough to defeat 50 soldiers that were heavily armed. Now that the intruder was still hiding somewhere in the city without leaving any traces behind, it would be understandable why the person that hired him would act so cautiously. After all, those were not 50 farmers. They were 50 soldiers who had been trained for this sort of thing. It was still quite unbelievable that one could beat them all single-handedly. Even the mercenaries might not be capable of doing such a thing. Although Francis believed that the intruder would not attack when the guard of the entire city was on high alert, he would still make sure he did his job at 100%. As long as he could receive the payment for it, he would not suffer any loss. That was his principle and his will to persevere. In the meantime, the other guard who was supposed to guard the entrance with him had gone back to get his clothes after he complained that the weather was too cold. After all, not every man is the same. At least Francis was not willing to behave that way. Even at the age of 40, Francis was still not able to exceed silver tier, as a human. That would mean that he did not stand much of a chance to upgrade to the glorious gold tier. Although he did not have the opportunity to improve, he had a lot of battle experience. he would still be able to be a mercenary to feed himself for the next 7 to 8 years. He could continue being a mercenary until he was 50 before considering to buy a piece of land to live a quiet life for the rest of his days. However, would a mercenary get to live his remaining days quietly? That's not bad for a lame joke though. Upon humoring himself with that thought, he laughed. Suddenly, Francis heard other sounds aside from the sound of the wind blowing. Thud, thud, thud. Footsteps could be heard from one corner of the street. At first, the sound of the footsteps was faint to the point that Francis did not hear anything at all. However, as the person approached closer, the footsteps began to get louder. Francis could no longer contain his curiosity. He turned towards the direction where the sound of the footsteps came. During normal times, no one would give a sh*t about any footsteps. However, ever since the city was on high alert, only a few would walk around the streets of the city. Furthermore, the disturbance in the morning and the cold weather had led no one to come out of their houses. Under the circumstances where the footsteps were loud and clear, Francis could not help but be skeptical. A brief moment later, a tall and sturdy man with black hair appeared in Francis' view. There was also a silver-haired girl with green eyes beside the man. Judging from their heights, they looked like father and daughter. Maybe they are siblings. If that's the case, their hair color does not match. No. Even if these two are close to each other, why would they appear at such a place at such a time then? That is very strange. The weather is so cold and an attack just happened not long ago. Francis kept his thoughts back to himself and reacted to the situation before him. He witnessed the two walking closer and closer to where he was standing. He had no time to think about it as well. So he walked up to the two, frowned and spoke loudly, "Halt, you two. This is a restricted area, please turn around." He's quite responsible in his job. After a few seconds of silence, the black-haired man nodded. He seemed to disregard the serious look on Francis's face and the sword Francis was holding. He carried on with his own comments, "So many of them, and you're the only one who has the look of a real warrior." What do you mean so many of them?" After reflecting on what the man said for one brief moment, Francis suddenly smelled the scent of blood in the air. Instantly, he felt an intense chill up his spine. That's right. There should be many more patrols in the area. So these two could not have walked all the way here to the entrance of the Count's mansion. So could it be? He widened his eyes and stared at the man and the little lady. He dropped his jaw, leaving him speechless as well. Those men are dead. Francis's facial expression changed, yet there was no sign of fluctuation in his voice when the man talked. He was so calm when he answered Francis, "You will be, in a while." So this man was the trespasser of the city gates. It was just a guess that seemed to be correct at the time. Although they were not engaged in combat yet, Francis could feel that his body was overwhelmed with fear the moment he laid eyes on the man. He could not stop his legs from turning wobbly. Right before him was the man with the sword that annihilated over 17 heavily armed soldiers back there. He was also the monster that took out a few dozen soldiers that were patrolling the streets without a sound. Judging from his aura, he has not achieved the glorious gold tier yet. However, this man could easily take him out. The man was on an entirely different level compared to Francis. "Please, turn around." Shouting out loud with his shaky voice, Francis forcefully suppressed himself from trembling further while raising his long spear up. He raised the tip of the spear towards the man. Although he was overwhelmed by fear, he did not falter at all. Instead, he shouted out loud, "I repeat. This is a restricted area. I shall be forced to comply and attack you if you decide to trespass." The man that stood before him was only wearing a very simple set of leather clothes and a set of riding gear. He did not have anything that seemed like a weapon on him. There seemed to be a small blood stain right by the corner of his trousers. It seemed that he killed all of the mercenaries that were patrolling the streets without even using any weapon. That meant this man was much more powerful than anyone could imagine. Francis understood how powerful the man was. So when Francis was saying those words, he could feel as if his heart was grabbed by another hand firmly. The blood in his entire body had lost control, however, he did not lower his weapon. Even if he lost all his strength because of his fear, he would still be standing there without moving a step backward. Well, one must make sure the job was done once the money had been received. Guarding the entrance was his current job and responsibility after all. It was true that there were also mercenaries who would abandon their jobs and responsibilities after they got their money. However, Francis was different from those scum. Even though he was not all-powerful, his will was firm and he would not falter, not even a little. Fighting was not really that terrifying. Fighting to the death was basically the minimum consciousness an imperial citizen should have. Meanwhile, the harshness of the North was far beyond the other empires. So as a northern mercenary, Francis had his own pride to uphold as well. Even if there was no chance of winning, he had to fight till his last breath. Your will is not too bad at all. The man with black hair looked at the long spear that Francis pointed at his neck. His face stayed the same. He seemed to be praising him. However, it's really unfortunate for you. After that. Well, there was no more after that. The man suddenly disappeared from Francis's view, followed by a breeze blowing across his face. Francis could feel his chest tighten. The spear in his hand suddenly broke in half by an overwhelming force that he could not see. His body seemed to become much lighter all of a sudden as he flew up high into the air before descending slowly back onto the ground. His consciousness began to slip. All he could see was darkness. Right before he completely passed out, he could still hear the tightly shut door being struck open by a fist. Chapter 16. Chapter 16, Tit for Tat. After taking out all of the mercenaries on the 3 streets and the one right before the entrance of the Count's mansion, Joshua did not hesitate to punch the door open after passing through the front yard, with Ying by his side. That man's not dead yet. Following closely beside her master, Ying seemed to be bothered by something. Why didn't you kill him? I don't kill those who are not capable to fight back. Well, speaking of which, I feel like a hypocrite for saying that aloud, replied Joshua, while they were observing their surroundings. Well, he did not seem bothered with such a trivial matter though. It's just one mercenary. If he's not dead, he's not dead. We don't have to double tap him. What does double tap mean? It means delivering a fatal blow to the fallen enemy to ensure their death is certain. Then what's a mercenary? They're warriors who earn money by taking on jobs. It was merely a simple exchange of words. Although Ying had some basic knowledge, her understanding was only limited to some situations and words. She had no clue at all about new words. Joshua believed that her databank was in urgent need of updating. Her knowledge seemed to be at least a few centuries behind time. Fortunately for him, even though this female divine armament's appearance was attractive on the surface, she had a curious mind. She was interested in almost everything around her. It seemed that it would not take long before she could familiarize herself with the world around her if she kept that pace up. After walking past a corner, they arrived at the hallway that was connected directly to the hall of the mansion. The size of the Count's mansion was similar to the size of a small city within a city. There was a wall with the main door on the outer layer of the mansion. Upon entering the door was a garden. The center point of the mansion was the building where people lived in. Because Joshua could take longer strides, Ying had to jog a little to keep up. She looked at her surroundings while mumbling to herself, so this is where Fang lives. You know Van. Upon picking up some interesting information from her mumbling, Joshua turned around and looked at Ying with a sense of surprise on his face. Yes. He used to do maintenance on us. She began talking about herself. Ying smiled slightly. She started recalling the past. Well, he would probably do it once every 2 weeks. So you know too, right? Maintaining a divine armament is pretty troublesome. No, I don't know actually. I didn't even know anything about divine armaments until recently. Oh. I see. Ying was momentarily stunned. She didn't realize her master was unaware of her existence until recently. She appeared to be handling the shock pretty badly. Well, there are so many divine armaments that remained here in the blade sealing chamber. Someone has to step in to maintain them after all. The previous count seemed to be busy all the time. So Fang was the one who did all the maintenance work. I see. Joshua nodded and asked again, from what you said, are all the weapons kept in the catacombs divine armaments? Initially, Joshua thought there were only 2 divine armaments in the room. The rest of the weapons in the surroundings of the room were regular blades. After all, there were hundreds of weapons in that very room. That's right. They all are. Ying nodded and said, to ensure the best resonance, each master will get the opportunity to handpick 2 to 3 divine armaments first. As most of the masters in the past cannot bear the load of controlling many divine armaments at the same time, each master can only pick one with the highest synchronization rate. Those that do not resonate with a human will be sealed until the next pick. As she was talking, Ying frowned a little. She seemed to be a little puzzled at the moment. For the sake of optimizing our fullest potential, the core of each divine armament is made from a body part of the master. My core is made from part of your right wrist while my brother is made from part of your left wrist. So it's strange. His resonance with you should be much higher than the resonance between you and I. So why did you choose me this time? That great axe? Indeed, that axe gave me a sense of familiarity that couldn't be explained. It seems that the soul resonance has made some minor changes that affected the synchronization rate. Oh my! I feel a little guilty about that. After guessing the reason behind it, Joshua was not stupid enough to say it out loud. Well, he could not help but have a new question after Ying said, so those divine armaments that are currently sealed at the blade sealing chamber, do they all have their own consciousness? Don't you think they'd be tormented by pain and suffering for being sealed away for so long? Will they? Ying did not seem to be bothered. Although she seemed like a 15-year-old girl, she was quite cold and indifferent. Her green pupils showed no emotions. Suffering and loneliness, only humans will feel those emotions. A weapon is forged just to be gripped in the hands of a human. That's the only reason we exist. If we can't be used, we shall wait while being sealed in our own sheaths. We shall wait until the day we're unsheathed for our purpose. That's really cold. Because our hearts are made of steel. Ying did not realize it, but she just made an unintentional pun. After a while, Joshua and Ying arrived before the main door to the Count's mansion. He raised his head up and looked at the small castle. There were huge wooden doors of the size of the city gates. After he carefully observed for a while, he nodded and said, they seem to have changed the door to a magic one. The energy waves are quite messy. It'll be much more difficult to open the door now. Still, it's still manageable. Master, could it be that you know magic? Upon hearing what Joshua said, Ying was curious. No, I'm just used to dismantling things. After ending the conversation with Ying, Joshua raised his fists. His eyes could only see the door that was reinforced by magic over and over again. Comparing it to the 37 energy nodes on those doors made of pure steel, the magic flow and its effect on this magic door were easy for Joshua to see through. It was just how Joshua put it, he must have destroyed at least 800 of these magic doors if not 1000. So he was too familiar doing it. Since that was the case, he swung his fist at the door without holding back. Bam! The air twisted in a singular shape. The next thing that followed was a loud bang. However, just before the loud bang could reach anyone's ears, Joshua's right fist had solidly landed on the door. The impact stirred up the wind and waves, which set off a gust of wind that blew into the surroundings, sweeping off sand from the ground. At the same moment, with the breathing technique which he had used countless times in the past, the power within his body rose again. Then red radiance began to flow into the door. Joshua, the legendary warrior, focused his senses and spread out his combat aura relentlessly all over the door. He then condensed them into countless light orbs. They were like small knives cutting through the pattern carved on the magic door, slowly destroying the magic circle that was supporting the door. Everything happened in an instant. Joshua slowly lowered his fist. A breeze came through. The door right before him began to wither, its ashes carried away by the wind that blew past. Only some residue remained on the ground. Supreme demolition. Initially, only those on the powerful gold tier could attain such a powerful skill. However, a mere silver tier warrior could simply use the skill like nothing mattered. That would be the most significant benefit of a legendary warrior's mastery skill. Why didn't they just use a door made of real steel? It could have been much more difficult for me to break down. Upon setting foot into the mansion, Joshua turned around, signaled Ying to follow him in. There will be a difficult battle ahead of us. It'll be time for you show them everything you've got. Come on. Yes, master. A loud bang shook the center point of the city. The bang was low and yet intensely loud. It sounded like a giant hammer just smashed into the city gates. Even though Danlaya was currently sitting in the main hall of the mansion, he could still hear the loud bang clearly. Danlaya was actually deep in thought before that. However, the bang was too loud to be ignored, interrupting his thoughts. So he turned towards the direction of the bang and frowned. What now? What's going out there? The location where the bang came from was too close to ignore. He could not help to feel something was off. I shall go and have a look. A mercenary who was standing right behind him was ready to go check things out outside. However, he was told to stay put instead. No, you stay here. Let Nar go first. This middle-aged man seemed to have other ideas. He continued, Francis and the other patrollers are out there. If there are any incidents, they'll be the ones to check it out first. You walk slow. It's better for you to stay here and protect me. Nar is a ranger. He's more suitable to do recon. You're right. The mercenary nodded and took a step back. Meanwhile, the ranger with a bow, Nar walked right up. He nodded vaguely to express that he would get it done before heading towards the direction of the loud bang. That's strange. Could it be possible that a house has just got destroyed by an avalanche or something? This is the north after all. Each house should have been reinforced to be sturdier and much more durable. The blizzard's not that bad this year. So it shouldn't be possible for any building to get destroyed. Standing up on his feet, Danlaya could sense that the loud bang was not of natural cause. He had seen mythical beasts attacking the city and houses crumbling down before his eyes. However, the loud bang did not sound like any sound he ever heard from those incidents. Another loud bang was heard. It was low and loud as well, more intense than the previous one. If the first bang came from nearby, this one sounded like it was coming from the floor directly below him. What the hell is going on now? It was not just the loud bang. Even the tables and chairs trembled a little. It was as if they were hit by a very small earthquake. Even though Danlaya was puzzled, his mind was still whirring. Not long before this, there was a loud bang nearby. A while after that, another incident struck the floor below me. These two incidents must have some sort of connection. That's right, there's an intruder. He must have taken out the patrols and Francis. He must have blown the main gate wide open and he must have arrived at the mansion by now. Joshua. That's right, it must be him. He actually struck at a time like this. How is that possible? Astonished by what just happened, Danlaya regretted endlessly. He should have reacted earlier. However, he had not thought that it would be possible for Joshua to come for him directly. He had never thought it was possible that Joshua would oversee to negotiate or whatever before striking his way to get to him. However, there are more than 20 Silvertear soldiers guarding the mansion at the moment. So how could he still dare to do it then? With regular logic, Danliah could not have guessed what was on Joshua's mind at that moment. He thought that his nephew might lurk around in the dark for some time before seeking an opportunity to strike again. As a result, he never imagined that Joshua would strike at a time where the Count's mansion was on highest alert. "Lando, Ro, you two should go too." After giving the swift order, the middle-aged man said decisively, "Summon the guarding mercenaries as well. Tell them it's a direct order from me." "Roger." The remaining 2 Silvertear mercenaries responded loud and clear. Then they quickly headed downstairs with their heavy footsteps. "You came alone. How daring of you, Joshua. My idiotic nephew, you'll draw your last breath when the patrols and the mercenaries all over the city gather here." Translator note. Note that the divine armament mentioned has synchronization and resonance. Both are used but neither was explained. My guess is that synchronization means the exchange/flow of power between the weapon and the human, while resonance is how compatible the weapon is to the human. Chapter 17. Chapter 17, How can power be an inconvenience? Getting into the mansion through the main entrance, an orc skin boot touched the wooden floor. The clear footstep echoed throughout the hall of the mansion. Joshua looked around at the decorations in the hall. His eyes darted left and right. The square hall had a diameter of tens of meters, the floor carpeted in beige. There were portraits of the past owners of the mansion across all 4 walls of the hall. At corners, there were potted plants that seemed to be wilting. Meanwhile, the center of the hall had an ornate weapons rack, which was filled with all types of weapons. Everything just seemed so familiar to Joshua. The mansion was where he was born and grew up. The entire place basically carried his past, such as a big hole in the carpet that was not far from him. When he was young, he accidentally burned that carpet while he was playing with fire. Because of that, Fang had taught him an unforgettable lesson. All thanks to the old butler's merciful begging, he was not beaten up badly and still had the opportunity to take charge of his own life. Raising his head to look around, Joshua could not help but think that every corner of the hall had memories of him growing up there. However, the people that lived there were no more. Other than himself, they were all gone. His father passed away. Meanwhile, his old butler had vanished without a trace. The female servants and the other butlers were all banished long ago. So there were no familiar faces at all in this large mansion for the time being. Not only that, there was a group of shameless individuals that were adamant about occupying the mansion. Their greed seemed to have no boundaries. Ying raised her head and looked at her master. She could feel Joshua's current emotions. However, as a newborn divine armament, her much simpler logical mentality could not understand Joshua's current mixed-up feelings. "I'm home." Joshua did not suppress his voice on purpose, nor did he deliberately shout it out loud. He merely announced that he was back, like what he usually did when he arrived home, in the past. However, before Joshua's voice could reverberate through the entire hall, a light flashed by the corner of the stairs which was approximately 10 meters from where he was standing now. Shoof! A shimmering arrow was traveling almost at the speed of sound, silently aimed at Joshua's neck. The moment when both ears could hear the air trembling so violently that a vague sound was present would be the moment when the arrow would strike its target. Humph! With a gentle lift of his 2 fingers, Joshua firmly stopped the incoming arrow. The force contained in that arrow was nullified by his catch. Joshua held the arrow in his hand. Then he turned and looked at the corner where the arrow was struck from in disdain. An elemental archer. If I were you, I would not have used a silent arrow. For a man who survived a battlefield where getting shot at with millions of arrows, this arrow strike has neither strength nor invisibility. The only thing you can get from this would be a little magical effect. Did you know you're hilarious? You can only talk. The ranger responded darkly. Not only he failed to ambush Joshua, but he also revealed his location to Joshua as well. This ranger held a crossbow in his hands, a small knife by his waist, and a big bow on his back. So he simply walked out from the shadows to reveal himself. His face was concealed by a hood. The only feature visible to Joshua was his eyes. From his own pocket, the ranger dug out 7 different types of crossbow arrows with different magic runes on each of them. He then sneered, "According to the rumors, I expected to find a very powerful man. It didn't cross my mind that the intruder is just an idiot. I can't believe you're not wearing any heavy armor when facing an archer. You didn't even bring a single weapon with you. It seems that the boss was right all along. Those mercenaries are just a bunch of losers. I can't believe they were defeated by an idiot like you." While he was talking, the ranger quickly loaded his crossbow with the arrows he took out from his pocket. Then he began to press the trigger of his crossbow repeatedly as fast as he could. There was almost no pause at all. In just a blink of an eye, 8 beams of magic bolts were fired at Joshua from different directions. At the same time, Joshua could only shake his head again and again. He tightened his grip on the arrow he caught earlier on. The steel in his grip started to twist as the sound of cracking and clicking was heard. Weak. With a wave of his hand, an intense sound piercing the air was heard. The arrow that was crumpled into an iron ball turned into a black stream of light before it was shot right toward the front straight away. The wind swept by the movement of the iron ball deflected all of the arrows that were shot at Joshua. In one brief instant, the iron ball had arrived before the eyes of the ranger. The ranger was just done shooting his arrows from his crossbow. He looked dazed. He did not manage to react to the situation at all. The strength embedded in the iron ball was so he